There's a popular theory online that the characters of Winnie the Pooh aren't just the quirky, lovable stuffed toys that Disney likes to suggest they are, but they're actually just cartoonish representations of serious mental health conditions. Now, that's not exactly the kind of thing that anyone would expect from Disney, but then, Walt Disney didn't invent Winnie the Pooh. Actually, he was dead by the time Winnie the Pooh even came to the big screen, so there's that. The theory goes that A.A. Milne based the characters around psychological conditions. Now, we have no way of knowing if that's true or not. Maybe he just kind of thought it would be funny to write about the pantless bear with a crippling addiction to honey. But maybe there's something here. Let's think about Pooh Bear. It really doesn't matter if you know him from the books or movies or the TV show, Pooh is defined by one thing and one thing only:
honey.
Honey?
His appearance in the 1977 movie The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh sees him climbing a tree to get honey from a beehive. But when he climbs up there and finally gets the honey he craves, he doesn't even stop to notice that all the bees are all over it, and he just eats it without even thinking about it. Now, if you believe in this theory, Pooh represents eating disorders, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense. If he's not eating or looking for honey, he's asking other people if they know where he can find it. He ambushes Rabbit at one point on the off chance he might have something to eat. The only kind of internal dilemma Pooh ever faces in his adventures is that he craves honey, but he's too polite to demand it. I mean, let's call it what it is. He's a perfect example of addiction, and his friends just don't want to talk about it. Or maybe they just don't know how. Take Piglet, Pooh's best friend. He's the most cowardly animal in the 100-acre woods, and he's terrified of everything. Sometimes he's totally justified in it. I mean, in Pooh's Heffalump movie, he gets scared of a noise made by the Heffalumps. Now, anyone who's heard a scary noise in the middle of the night would obviously be pretty scared. But then in the Tigger movie, Piglet is shown as being scared to voice his thoughts on how Tigger's bouncing is a problem for others. He couldn't be the one to call Pooh out on his problem. That's a pretty solid example of Piglet being representative of generalized anxiety disorder. GAD is described as a long-term condition that can cause an everlasting sense of dread, worry, and fear about a wide range of situations and issues. And that just sums Piglet up so perfectly. It doesn't matter if it's a big problem or a tiny implication, he's going to be terrified. Unlike Eeyore, who just doesn't really care. Actually, Eeyore is one of the easiest to identify in this theory because he's so negative and depressive about everything that he pretty much ticks off all the boxes of depression. In The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore loses his tail and has to have it stapled back on, but he's not all that grateful to have it back because, in his words, he'll
most likely lose it again anyway.
The usual symptoms of depression include a constant low mood, feeling hopeless, and having low self-esteem, all of which Eeyore shows on a regular basis. Even his character design and appearance suggest the concept of depression. Artists often describe depression as a gray cloud hanging over everything, and Eeyore totally fits that bill. He's lethargic, gray, sad to look at. He just has the vibes of someone who knows nothing will ever work out for him. Now, contrast that with Rabbit, who is the poster bunny for obsessive-compulsive disorder. There's a moment in The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh where Rabbit is enjoying some tea alone. But suddenly, Pooh starts sniffing around outside asking if Rabbit has any food he can enjoy. Rabbit freaks out saying,
Oh no, not again. Oh my goodness.
which implies that Pooh's eating disorder and constant craving for food has caused chaos in Rabbit's life before. But Rabbit's burrow is shown to be extremely well organized, and the idea of Pooh coming in and causing chaos leads him to start hiding all of his china and cutlery. It's pretty obvious that Rabbit likes things a certain way, with everything in its proper place and no chaos. And of course, that is not the kind of existence he could possibly enjoy when you have a bunch of unpredictable animals around you whose whole existence and survival mechanisms seem to welcome chaos. The only one who doesn't seem to be particularly chaotic is Owl, and that's not because he doesn't want to be, he just thinks he's more mature. In fact, Owl kind of seems like your usual teacher type of character on the surface, right? He's kind of stuffy and rude, superior. He seems to think he's better than everyone else, and maybe he is, I don't know. But when he starts to speak, he's not as smart as he thinks. He misreads words or spells them wrong, he forgets things as soon as he says them. His memory just seems really poor. So what is it? Is he an idiot?
No.
If you buy into this theory that the characters all represent different psychological conditions, then Owl would probably have something like dyslexia, which would explain why he struggles so much with what he's trying to say. But dyslexia has nothing to do with forgetting what he says as soon as he says it. That would suggest something even more serious like amnesia, Alzheimer's, or something. But if that's the case, it would have to be pretty selective because it doesn't always happen. And I think you also have to factor in that Owl is also dealing with the chaos around him. I'm sure that anyone, dyslexic or not, would struggle to focus when you have a honey-crazed bear and a hyperactive tiger bouncing around them. I know I would. Let's talk about Tigger, actually.
I do a little bouncing together.
So, Tigger is one of Disney's most beloved characters because of his fun-loving, energetic approach to life. He actually might be the most chaotic character of any of the Disney properties, but don't quote me on that. We can summarize the character of Tigger with just a few key traits: unable to sit still, constantly fidgeting, unable to concentrate, excessive physical movement, excessive talking, acting without thinking. I could go on. All of these traits tie back to the same psychological condition of attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or ADHD. Tigger is so constantly wired without needing any kind of stimulant, exactly like people in our world functioning with ADHD. Sometimes it's so intense that he literally starts bouncing off the walls just because he can't possibly sit still for longer than maybe a minute at most. Honestly, I could pretty much just pick a random scene with Tigger and it would be a great example. In one of the books, Tigger climbs a tall tree with Roo without thinking, only to get to the top and realize he doesn't know how to get back down. He simply lacks the focus to think about anything longer than the immediate moment. Now, if you really want to think about a character who is not like that, Kanga is basically the most overprotective mom in the history of overprotective moms. You'd never see her allowing Roo to climb trees, which is why he tends to do it without her knowing about it. Kanga is not even about trying to protect her son from genuine dangers. She's just determined to keep her in her pouch as long as humanly possible. She doesn't believe he can survive without her. That is a form of social anxiety disorder, a more specific anxiety condition than, say, Piglet has. Piglet is terrified of basically everything, but Kanga has specific fears of being around other people because they're so unpredictable and could potentially lead to her child being harmed. I mean, she's not exactly trusting of those around her. Honestly, though, this one just feels like any parent, right? All parents are fiercely protective of their babies. She's a little more passionate about it. And that has an effect on her son. Roo has been sheltered his entire life. I think it's easy to understand that he would be somewhat psychologically scarred by this experience, whether he knows it or not. And that would explain why he's so clueless and reckless about life. He likely sits somewhere on the autism spectrum, especially given that he finds a lot of comfort in his mother's pouch. In a kind of metaphorical way, he basically hasn't left the womb and can't bring himself to do it. All he can do is return to the warmth and comfort he's known his entire life. You could even argue that Roo would end up very similar to Piglet, with a kind of heightened anxiety disorder that leaves him super scared of anything he hasn't experienced before, which is, of course, everything. But we can't talk about Winnie the Pooh without talking about Christopher Robin, the only human person to interact with all of these animals. And why is that? Well, let's just think about that for a moment. He is the only human who comes into the woods to interact with magical talking animals, some of whom seem to have pretty serious conditions. So what if he has a condition like schizophrenia? I mean, it would make sense. The only time he ever seems to see his friends is when he needs them. The 2018 movie Christopher Robin also leans into this idea. In that movie, Christopher Robin loses his childhood wonder and grows up to be a very serious adult. But through some typical movie magic, Winnie the Pooh and friends wander through the door that Christopher Robin always emerged and find themselves in London. After reuniting with the grown-up Winnie the Pooh, Christopher slowly rediscovers the wonders of his youth through these talking stuffed toys. Honestly, having watched this movie, the schizophrenia angle is so interesting. The movie really leans into these stuffed animals being real, with Christopher's daughter recognizing them as actual beings. But what if she's just inherited her father's schizophrenia and is imagining them too? It would make a lot of sense if the Robins just naturally invented these beings to help them cope with their own struggles. I mean, isn't that what art is all about anyway? Coping with your life struggles through new creations? We've pretty much covered covered all of the characters that appear in basically every Winnie the Pooh story since Milne's first published story, but even the characters invented for the Disney shows and movies align with this theory. I mean, take Gopher for example. He's a character who's constantly saying things he doesn't want or intend to say. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like Tourette syndrome? Honestly, there's no way to know if A.A. Milne considered any of this when he started writing about these characters or the 100-Acre Woods. Actually, he was pretty well known to hate how successful they became, so I really doubt he thought about them beyond his initial scribblings of notes. He kinda sounded like an Eeyore, if you get my drift. But the theory really lines up nicely, no matter which version you watch or read. The characters are so defined by these select traits that it makes total sense that they would be representing these conditions. Or maybe it's just about a kid who befriended a bunch of animals that somehow don't want to kill one another. I don't know, man. I just like cartoons.